Trump, coming back as the 47th President of the United States, introduces a new level of uncertainty in an already fractured world order. It's time to now peek into the future and try and get a sense of what a second Trump presidency could mean for India and the rest of the world. And for this, I'm joined from New York, live and exclusive, by Ian Bremmer, one of the world's top risk gurus, whose job it is to try and probabilistically understand what is most likely to happen next and why. And at a time of so much uncertainty, Ian Bremmer is amongst the best people to be speaking to. Mr. Bremmer, welcome back, and thank you for joining us on the News Track at a time when there's so much change in your country. You said when we spoke last before the elections that intellectually you thought that Donald Trump was going to come back to power, even though you wouldn't personally want him to. Explain to everyone watching at this moment, for the United States, internally, what do you expect the second Trump presidency to do, which would be different from what the world and America has seen during the first Trump presidency?
Well, the first point is that this was a dramatic win. It was the popular vote, not just the electoral vote. So you saw Kamala Harris conceding on the following day, everyone in the United States recognizing that Trump did win a free and fair election. Yes, there was some external interference, particularly from Russia. Yes, there were some internal concerns with ballot boxes, but nothing significant. So the election itself is done. It was held to a gold standard, and Trump has won. Now, this is an administration that comes to power on the back of dozens of convictions against Donald Trump. So the first point, what he needs to do very differently from the first time around, is he needs to ensure he has control over the so-called power ministries, the Department of Justice, the IRS, the FBI. He's got to, end all of the cases against him, and he wants to make sure that no such cases could ever be launched in the future by anybody else. So there will be, I think, a politicization, even a weaponization of those institutions that could have some impact on rule of law, and it might be used, and this will be careful to watch, against some of his own internal enemies. A very important point, and something I think that concerns a lot of the Democrats that will be leaving power over the coming weeks. A second major point is that we've already seen some big wars open around the world. You and I talk about them all the time. And Trump has promised to end them. He says he's going to end the war between Russia and Ukraine in one day, and doesn't even need to wait until he's president, can do it in the lame duck. That deeply concerns NATO allies because they worry that he's not going to coordinate with them. It deeply concerns President Zelensky, who has already reached out to Trump in his first 24 hours to say, hey, are we good? I really want to work with you. But of course, he's very concerned he's going to face pressure to end the war where it is right now and lose that territory. In the Middle East, of course, Trump's first trip as president when he won back in 2016 was to Saudi Arabia and then to Israel. Those leaders have remained his and his family's biggest friends, supporters from around the world in the 4 years that they've been out of power. Wouldn't surprise me if Trump goes back, certainly promoting Israel very strongly, even saying that they should be going harder against Iran, against the nuclear facilities, for example. That's very important to watch. Also important to watch how Iran responds to all of this. So the context where Trump becomes president here, both domestically and internationally, so much more volatile, so much more uncertain, so much more dangerous than it was in 2017.
One of the problems Donald Trump had during his first term was that the people he appointed in important positions didn't necessarily fully align with his agenda. That is likely to change during his second presidency. Who are the key personalities you are looking out to most carefully who are likely to feature in important ranks in the second Trump presidency?
Well, you're absolutely right that he hired a lot of adults, people that were acceptable to the Republican establishment. that also acted as buffers, even brakes, on some of the policies that he would have wanted to implement. He certainly will not do that this time around, and that's particularly true for the Attorney General, for example, Bill Barr, who is very conservative but also very independent-minded in how he thinks about the country and rule of law. You would never see someone like that reappointed in a Trump administration this time around. So I think those positions, the question will be how competent they are, and if they're really incompetent, they might not get approved by Senate, though his big win makes it easier, makes the bar on that a little bit lower. But more broadly, you're going to see loyalists. And some of those loyalists, I think, are people we would broadly see as capable in their jobs. Some of them are not. Now, I think that Treasury, for example, will be a loyalist, a strong loyalist, but from Wall Street. The names I'm hearing, Howard Lutnick, who has been very involved in the campaign, first said, I just want to help you get elected, but as he's gotten closer to Trump, now wants a position of power. He's very interested. I also hear people like John Paulson, the hedge fund owner, other folks like that have given a lot to Trump and that he sees as friends and colleagues. Linda McMahon, longtime friend of Trump, head of the World Wrestling Federation, also very involved in the campaign, seems to want to be Secretary of Commerce. For state, which of course India will be very interested in, some of the names that are presently floated, Bill Hagerty, the senator from Tennessee, the former ambassador to Japan. I think he would be considered the more practical, sort of traditional appointee, but also someone like Rick Grinnell, who had been ambassador to Germany, was the acting National Intelligence Council chair, and is quite close and quite friendly to Trump. Defense, Tom Cotton, the senator from Arkansas, someone that I hear an awful lot from the inner Trump circle. But, as you know, Rahul, President Trump is going to make these decisions himself at the last minute. He will not be second-guessed by other people, and he's going to feel much more unconstrained in how he does that because his message and his undisciplined campaign won and won big. So he thinks he doesn't need a lot of advice from people around him, that they're telling him to act like an adult, and he shouldn't have to listen to them. And that we saw that in the vice presidential appointment. Very different here. Mike Pence was the responsible adult figure that everyone was comfortable with. J.D. Vance is the guy who's the friend of Donald Trump Jr., who Trump liked personally, and who is the id. He's the guy that really channels the Trump message. And anyone that thinks, oh, J.D. is going to be like Dick Cheney, he's going to run the administration, make the appointees. No, he's not. Trump doesn't want anyone to take all of the limelight except Trump. And if he saw Vance starting to do that, he would cut Vance down to size. So what you'll see is a number of different competing power circles around Trump, but Trump is in charge, and Trump will make decisions on the areas that are important to him. And the reason why you might get someone like Hagerty, who is much more acceptable at state, is because, frankly, on most foreign policy issues, Trump doesn't care all that much. It's not his personal priority. And why Attorney General will be such a strong loyalist is that is a very high priority for President-elect Trump going forward.
To what extent do you think this election has fundamentally recast the dynamics of American politics? Donald Trump is a convicted felon. He has serious sexual harassment and other charges against him. Despite that, there was a very strong pushback from America. A lot of the polls were wrong. Hispanics, Latinos seem to have voted for Donald Trump, which wasn't something that the polls captured. A lot of young men who were considered reluctant voters came out for Donald Trump. Is Trumpism now just the default manner in which the Republican Party is likely to function even beyond the Trump years? And then from a Democrat perspective, what would they need to do, in your view, to be able to capture the heart and mind of America again? How do they come back from this excessive wokeism that seems to have pushed them back?
Well, the first point is that the reason that I believe Trump was going to win had little to do with Trumpism. It had to do with the fact that in every major election around the world this year, incumbents had a hard time. Inflation was high, coming down, but still high levels. Illegal immigration high, coming down, still high levels. Every developed economy in the world that had an election this year, the incumbents got hammered. That is unusual, but it is the wave that we're presently in. So it would have been very surprising to me if the incumbent, either Biden or Harris, had been able to win. That's the point. But now that Trump has won, and that this is a decisive victory, and certainly he and his supporters believe that this is a repudiation of democratic, elite liberal identity policies, redistribution, even, sort of broader globalism, if you will, though I don't think the Democrats reflected much of that. They're going to move in a very different direction. So for the Republicans, this means industrial policy. That this means less globalization, less free trade, ending the wars, bringing the troops home, bringing the jobs home, bringing the capital home. Not a message that American allies are going to like, and especially those allies that believe that their alliance is based on shared values. The idea that there's a collective security provided among like-minded states, the idea that rule of law and the promotion of democracy is something that these countries all believe in. Trump decisively does not accept that. So you're going to have allies that have to recognize that the United States doesn't actually stand for the values that they thought America did. And that's going to make the relationship more transactional, more vulnerable to a sudden shift, and it'll create more hedging behavior. Now, Democrats have to understand that a lot of what I would call nanny state behavior, that, we're moving towards progress, and if you're not with us, you're not welcome. And, you see that with all of the DEI, diversity, inclusion initiatives. You see it with policies about wokeism and affirmative action. You see it with policies on transgender rights, for example, and gay rights. You see it with pro-choice, even, which has now been rolled back significantly by the Republicans. Much more willingness to accept immigration, even tolerate illegal immigration, and not resolve it with a heavy-handed position. The Democrats have decisively lost on those issues. They have a core of progressive, comparatively well-educated elites in cities that want that agenda, and that is an issue that they have lost many of their supporters. Their working class, their middle class, their Hispanic, their male supporters, even some black supporters around the country. And if Democrats want to win going forward, they're going to have to recognize that they went too far on issues that were not core to their party. And they're going to have to roll that back. They're going to have to accept that some of what they believe is right, the country is not prepared to listen to. That's a hard thing for them to hear. It's a hard thing for them to digest, but it's clearly a reality in the United States today.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President-elect Donald Trump seem to have had a good first conversation, harking back to their old friendship. How is the Trump presidency likely to be different from a Kamala Harris presidency in terms of its relationship with India? What are the key wins that Donald Trump would want from India to be able to ensure that he can push the strategic friendship with India at a higher level? What could India possibly be looking to give him, which would get him really excited about India again?
Well, you and I have spoken about this over the past couple of years. I've been consistent in saying that India is one of the very few countries in the world that didn't really need to worry about the U.S. election. That whether Harris won or Trump won, that Modi and his government would be in a very strong position with the United States. Now, the critical point for India is that Trump has a serious problem with China, and that problem is particularly focused on the burgeoning trade deficit. China's economy is performing badly right now. The only area of the economy that is outperforming is manufacturing. They are over manufacturing and they don't have domestic demand, which means there's lots of dumping all around the world, both directly to the United States and also to the United States through third countries like Mexico, like Southeast Asian countries, even like India. So one thing that I think Trump will focus on, and Robert Lighthizer, who's likely to run trade as he did in the previous administration, will be to what extent the Indians are acting as a conduit for Chinese exports and making sure that there is coordination in preventing that or adequately tariffing that with the United States. That will be a priority, and that will be brought to the Indian government early. But the very fact that Trump will actively want to further decouple U.S. investments away from China will be an opportunity for India, especially with the Chinese economy performing badly. Now, if that goes too badly and China ends up having a real financial crisis, that could depress growth around the world. Also, that's going to happen in an environment where the U.S. is going to be more highly inflationary, more tariffs, and also more pressure on illegal immigration, increasing labor costs, will significantly increase the cost of goods in the United States. That inflation will strengthen the dollar, and that will put more pressure on foreign currencies, especially in the developed markets. So I think the economic pressure on India from a Trump administration and from U.S.-China relations is going to grow significantly. And Modi's going to have to manage that, navigate that. Now, as you know, costs in India are comparatively low. Labor costs are comparatively low. There are lots of productivity gains from new technologies and infrastructure that India can still pick up. Most of the efficiency gains from the bureaucracy Modi's already accomplished over the last 10 years. But India is in a better position to respond to these challenges than most countries are around the world. Still, it's going to be a more challenging environment.
As President Trump mounts pressure on China, what impact is that likely to have on the future relationship between Beijing and Delhi? We've seen the People's Liberation Army already agree to pull back from Depsang and Demchok, where there was a confrontation with the Indian army. Because of US pressure, are relations between India and China likely to get better? What path do you see, and to what extent do you think Beijing's actions are governed by the fact that Trump is now going to be back in the White House?
Yeah, it's the opposite of the question you just asked me, and it's a very good one, because of course, if you are Beijing right now and you recognize that your relationship with the United States has the potential to go much, much worse, and if Trump is talking about 60% tariffs on all Chinese exports on top of their present levels, and the Chinese have no good way to respond to that, they need a better relationship with India. They need a better relationship with Europe and with other countries around the world. And they might hope that Trump so antagonizes his allies with an America First policy, and that the Americans become so distracted by their own internal debates and conflicts over rule of law, that this will create an opportunity for the Chinese to do more, to develop a better geopolitical position, especially in their own backyard in Asia. And so I expect that in the near term, China's desires to normalize relations with India are actually going to increase significantly. And this is a real opportunity for Modi at this point.
There's been so much talk about Elon Musk, who Trump called the new rising star. What role do you think the billionaire will play, officially and unofficially, in the way Donald Trump governs? And what do you make of the fact that somebody so rich and so influential will have such direct access to the world's most powerful man?
Well, first of all, Trump doesn't really have a technology policy. 4 years ago, that was not a priority at all, not domestically, not globally. Elon Musk obviously does. AI in particular is a very big advantage for the United States on the global stage. And Elon de facto will be able to have a significant hand, maybe the primary hand, in capturing the regulatory policy, the stimulus policy, the subsidy policy that you will see from the United States on issues that are core to his businesses. So, I mean, his $75 million bet on Trump is frankly the single best political bet I have seen from a U.S. actor in decades. It's going to pay off massively for Elon. Now, Elon, as you know, has a very big part of his business in China, particularly Tesla. And he's made trips to China. In fact, he's canceled a trip to India in recent year. And when he went to China, he put himself forward as, I'm the guy that can help you with Trump. I'm the guy that can help ensure that, he's not going to beat you up too much. Well, the Chinese are hoping that Elon is going to be their interlocutor. But is that really going to change Trump policy? Maybe it will help them on semiconductors, export controls, other areas that are adjacent to Elon's business, mutual development of AI. But on tariffs, I have a very hard time imagining that Elon is going to be able to help do a deal between the Americans and the Chinese. He is holding himself out as that. He will continue to tell the Chinese, I'm your guy. But that is an untested proposition as of now, and it will be tested. And there is big upside for Elon if he gets it right. But if he gets it wrong, the punishment that he will face from the Chinese government will be immediate and severe. And I think that this is going to be one of the most interesting things to watch.
And plus now he's got cars like Huawei and from BYD, which are selling at much lower prices than Tesla. So the novelty that Tesla had in China is now frankly over, and they've got cheaper, better cars. Now, President Trump called Zelensky the world's greatest salesperson. He doesn't want to give free weapons anymore to Ukraine. You spoke of Zelensky trying to build some kind of a rapport with Trump, but how do you see Trump's belligerent position on this war impact the immediate course of the Russia-Ukraine conflict? Is this war now likely to end, and in what way and fashion?
Trump wants it to end, and he's going to put a lot of pressure on Zelensky. And this is an enormously challenging position. The Ukrainians are losing land. The war is not going well for them, and they clearly now know that they cannot count on the Americans, their most important deliverer of arms and military materiel over the last 3 years. Now, there's a big question on whether or not the fact that the Europeans are so supportive of Ukraine, because this is such an existential issue for many Europeans in a way that is not the United States, will Zelensky continue to fight and rely on Poland and the Baltic states and France? And will that be enough? The German government is collapsing. We don't know what the next German government will bring. Maybe that will help Ukraine if Friedrich Merz becomes the next chancellor, probably more supportive, but that's an open question. So the first point is it's harder for the Ukrainians to just rely on the Europeans. The second point is we don't know if the Europeans will hang together. Will there be a strong, united EU position in support of Ukraine, or will more countries align with Trump and go the way of Viktor Orban? How about Meloni in Italy, for example? How about the Germans? How about the non-frontline states? What does it mean that France is facing internal challenges from the far right, from Marine Le Pen's party, for example? We don't know. What we know is that Trump wants to end the war. He's going to call Putin. He's going to call Zelensky and say, you've got to stop fighting now, or else I cut you off, Ukraine, or else I sanction you heavily, Russia. How do the Ukrainians respond to that? It's going to be very hard for them to say, okay, I'll end the war. But the consequences of them saying no are much more severe. So I think of all of the things out there internationally on Trump's plate, the number one issue, without any question, that has a real transition point, a tipping point under Trump, will be the future of Ukraine, the future of relations with Russia, and of course the implications for NATO.
How is Benjamin Netanyahu likely to use Trump's presidency to push forward his agenda? They share a great equation. After the last round of strikes, is the conflict now between Iran and Israel likely to stay where it is, or do you think Benjamin Netanyahu will push ahead using this opportunity to try and recast West Asia in a way that suits Israel best, and he thinks this is the time to do it?
I think the latter. We're close to a deal ending the fighting with Hezbollah and Israel. We might see that happen in the next few weeks. But on Iran, Jared Kushner has been circulating a plan to take out Iran's nuclear capabilities, saying this is the time to do it. He wants the Israelis to make that move. Trump has been saying that Israel's been restrained by Biden and should be acting in a much tougher fashion against their enemies. Netanyahu certainly sees that his dominance militarily and the inability of Iran to respond effectively against Israel makes this a unique time. So if the Iranians proceed with further strikes against Israel directly, or as we've heard recently, perhaps through their proxies in Iraq, the potential for this war to expand in Iraq is real. The potential for the Israelis to decide to strike Iran's energy facilities and their nuclear facilities with global consequences, I think, has gone up because of the Trump election. Now, a big question, Rahul, is that more likely before the elections or after? After the Israelis could coordinate an actual response, an attack with a Trump administration. Before, the war is expanding when Biden is still president. Trump doesn't have, any accountability. Then he becomes president. The Israelis announce the war is over. He's ended the war. So, I could see it either way, frankly. The Israeli prime minister, who just sacked his own defense minister, creating more consolidated power around him, is in a strong position right now.
Super sharp insights as always, Ian Bremmer. Thank you very much for taking our time. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure, Rahul. Be good.